What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Water Cooler Talk. My name is Caleb Turner, and I'm a sports writer at KSL.com. It is December, officially December 1st, and we're coming at you with another recap of what went down this weekend in sports and looking ahead to what this month might be bringing us. And today I am joined with a special guest, Nate Schwartz, a friend of mine. We actually met over Twitter over a joined love of NBA and pop culture and all things adjacent to the Ringer, as it were back then. And Nate and I continue to be friends. He lives here in Salt Lake, so welcome to Water Cooler Talk for the first time, Nate.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. Longtime listener, first time guest. So thank you, thank you. Yeah, and a little bit about myself and what I can kind of bring to these conversations is I live here in Salt Lake. Like you just said, we met via Twitter. Huge sports fan from the Bay Area originally, but I've kind of adopted these Utah teams as my kind of secondary teams that I'm following and rooting for. So I can't wait to go through these wins and losses with you.
Yeah, and it may be important to mention that Nate and I did both go to BYU, so both Cougar sports fans, BYU football fans, I guess, at least during our time as students, and have followed the teams afterward for better or for worse, maybe. So we'll
Yeah,
definitely talk some BYU later on.
boy, will we! Yes, rise and shout.
Excellent. Well, to kick things off, we will start with a little bit of college sports, college football. Last week of the regular season for all these teams, and that was the official end for a couple of these teams, and not for one of them. So Utah State season finale for them. They lost 42 to 37 on the road to Colorado State. Utah on the road, going all the way across the country to Florida, lost or they sorry they didn't lose. I'm used to saying lost because they lost seven in a row. Utah won 28 to 14, beating UCF, and I believe UCF actually fired their coach like the day after that game happened. So it's one of those really gut punch wins for the Utes there.
Tough beat for that guy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, 'tis the season as seasons end, with varying degrees of success and expectations. The coaching carousel begins, and there might be more on that later in this month, maybe as we see. There's been some, brief rumors and hints maybe of Kyle Whittingham hanging up the hat. He is in his 60s. He's been around for a long time, so I'm not breaking any news there, but it is a possibility. But Utah season is over, so that's the last time we'll be recapping them for you guys on this podcast. And moving on to the other side, to the Cougars, BYU got their 10th win. They beat Houston at LaVell Edwards Stadium 30 to 18. And I just want to know, I realized this today as I was writing this out. We do predictions every week at KSL.com on our KSL Pick'em for college football, and my pick was BYU 30 to 15 by a field goal. I was close. So hopefully I got a decent amount of points on that one. And then moving forward, we'll talk a little hockey. I got the chance to actually cover the most recent Utah Hockey Club game for KSL.com. Got to write that recap. The boys in blue were down in Vegas. They've been on the road quite a bit. They won road games in Montreal and won the game in Vegas. Lost at home in overtime to Edmonton, but more on Vegas on that win in Vegas later. Sorry, a lot of recaps for you guys this week. There was a lot of sports, as I mentioned last week, this week of Thanksgiving. It was feast week, so a lot happened. Bear with us. Utah State basketball, 7-0 to start the season. I mentioned they were undefeated. BYU was undefeated as well. Well, the Aggies stayed undefeated. BYU did not. They lost their first game of the season in overtime to Ole Miss. And Utah women's basketball, the last hoops team we'll mention, because they got a big win just a couple days ago. They beat number three Notre Dame. The women running Utes are 6-2 on the season. And lastly, a little more basketball. Skipping to the Jazz, they've lost four in a row. All four of those at home at the Delta Center. They've lost eight of their last nine games overall. And this is kind of a silver lining, maybe good news, bad news. Back in the bottom three in the NBA standings. So tough times, but also maybe exactly what a lot of Jazz fans want.
Cooper Flag, it's welcome to Salt Lake. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
I actually watched this game, the Jazz versus Lakers, and I don't know if you're able to see it, Caleb, but it came really down to the wire. I think the Jazz only lost by 1 point, and there was this kind of there's this moment at the end where Coach Hardy called this timeout that secured their loss. I guess they snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. I guess, and social media was kind of going nuts about that. But like you're saying, if you're a Jazz fan, I'm a casual Jazz fan. I'm not too upset about the call. It ends up doing exactly what we want, right? Like we don't have any expectations for the season. Let's let our guys play. Let's let Coach Hardy call as many end game losing timeouts as he wants from here on out. That's what I say. As a Jazz fan on this podcast, that's what I say. Let Coach Hardy call the timeouts.
Okay, so I'm really glad you brought that up because it does seem to be. I didn't see it in live because the Spurs game had started by then. But if I understand it correctly, did Colin Sexton make the shot?
Yes, yes, he did. and
Oh
you can go
no.
back and watch the replay afterwards. He makes the shot. The Jazz would go at one point with like a second left, and then he looks and he sees that the timeout was called, and I think he hits the ground. Like he's super upset.
Uh,
Yeah, it was pretty wild.
that's got to be tough in the moment. I did notice that our Jazz guy Ryan Miller was in the press conferences after and mentioned Will said, they had kind of planned that out that he saw Colin backing up with his dribble, and so he said, oh, okay, something's broken, and he's obviously in retrospect he wouldn't have called it, and then Colin said he didn't blame Will for calling it. He said he could have called it himself, because things weren't really working out. Obviously, you never know if he's gonna make the shot, right? Like that sometimes it goes in, sometimes it doesn't. It just happened to go in. But that's kind of like a little bit of the story of the Jazz season this year is like it's kind of a lot of luck has played into it. Like they like won a random game against the Knicks, and the Knicks are like one of the best teams in the NBA. And like then one, but lost 4 games on either side of that win. So I don't know, but yeah, back in the top 3 lottery odds. I mean, really the worst. I mean, things could get worse in the lottery technically, but odds are you'll get a top 5 pick at least at this point, which in a really good draft. I've talked a little bit about him on this podcast. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to catch any of the BYU guy, Yegor Demin, the Russian 6'8", 6'9" point guard. But he's up there, and he's if he goes top 4, the Jazz could have a realistic shot at him.
Oh, that would be rad. Yeah,
Yeah,
just moving up north a little bit.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, there we go. I guess we'll see what happens in the coming months.
Awesome. Well, as we look ahead, finishing up that recap, tomorrow at the Delta Center, the Utah Hockey Club is back in town taking on the Dallas Stars for the first time, and then they head on the road for 2 games later on next weekend. Hockey Club at their record is 10-10 right now, so perfect 500. Um, and I'll mention a little more about that last one they got later on in our winners and losers. Next up on the schedule, we've got BYU men's basketball. They've got a big game on the road at Providence on Tuesday. And another road game here. The Jazz start a 7 game road trip that will last them through Christmas. So if you're hoping to catch this excellent barn burning Jazz team over the next couple weeks, sorry, you're out of luck. You'll have to travel to another state to do that. And lastly, as we look ahead, I mentioned that the season's over for Utah football and Utah State football. However, BYU football season is not over. Much to the chagrin of many of their fans, they will not be going to the Big 12 championship game. However, they'll still get a bowl game, and they got 10 wins on the season. It's looking like right now the projection is the Alamo Bowl in my beloved native San Antonio, Texas, versus Colorado, and the Coach Prime.
That is
So
that is such a tasty game. Like I,
yeah,
I really hope that is how these chips fall. I think BYU versus Coach Prime, you get the added bonus of it being in your hometown. Like that, best case scenario, honestly, for me. Outside of the conference championship, best case scenario.
yeah, and I think this kind of carries us into our winners and losers for the week. We'll start off with the positive with the winners as I usually do. I'll finish up with Utah hockey. Mentioned that win down in Las Vegas. I didn't mention the score line. Utah Hockey Club beat the Las Vegas Golden Knights 6-0. They had all 6 goals through the first 2 periods, and it was the first shutout in hockey club history, given it's not a very long history. But through 24 games or how many they've played, they hadn't gotten a shutout, hadn't allowed 0 goals. So shout out to them. Shout out to goalie Jackson Stauber. First start. ever for the Utah Hockey Club. I think it was like his ninth NHL start. They had called him up from the Tucson Roadrunners, which is like the team right below the Utah Hockey Club. And because they had to fill in for their injured starter, Connor Ingram, who had been starting the first, many games to start the season. And he comes in, 25-year-old kid, and and does the thing that nobody else could for the hockey club and gets that shutout. So shout out to Jackson. I know he's been getting a lot of attention on Utah Hockey Twitter. I'm not sure if you're on Utah Hockey Twitter, Nate, but big moment for him.
I am not on Utah Hockey Twitter. Actually, I am not doing my service as a Salt Lake City resident, and I've done a very poor job following the Utah Hockey Club thus far this year. I actually have a question for you because as you're
Yeah.
going through kind of that rundown of their recent game, I wanted to yell like, "Go Hockey Club!" Is there something that Utah Hockey Club fans refer to their team as, like go club?
I swear somebody tried to get clubbers going.
Ugh,
That might have been our friend Jackson Payne. Because
sorry.
he has his commanders and calls them manders. So he's got his little nicknames that he likes to throw out. The chant they do, the only chant I've heard in the Delta Center during their games is "Let's go Utah." So
Okay, there we go. All right, sure. Well, as a BYU fan, that's like a tough thing for me to vocalize. But if that's what I have to say, that is what I will say.
sounds good, sounds good. But yeah, shout out to them, and they'll have a few more home games coming up. If you can't catch a Jazz game, catch a hockey game. I would say they're just as fun, and you see a lot more fights in hockey than you do in the NBA. So at least they got that going for it. But now to the important moment. We move on to our losers, maybe singular, of the week. When I was going through and trying to pick this out, I gave the loser this week to BYU. Now, you might be asking, Caleb, they won their game. They won 10 games this season. How can they be a loser? Well, this is what happened. They won 10 games, yes, 10-2 record, but no Big 12 championship game. That's tough, given it is they're only their second season in the conference. But I'm pretty sure only three teams in the entire conference finished with 10 wins overall, 7-2 in conference. Um, and I think for what fans felt like maybe they deserved, it came down to the last game. They were essentially these four teams that were vying for these two spots in the Big 12 championship game: Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado. It ends up being, as you can probably guess from who I said was going to be in the Alamo Bowl, Iowa State and Arizona State. But yeah, it came down to those last few games. And one take that I kind of wanted to throw in here before maybe you have your 2 cents, Nate, is I think it was, with it coming down to the wire in the last week of the regular season, typically this last week is known as rivalry week in college football. Well, in the Big
Hmm.
12, they don't do that. I read a couple articles about before the season talking with the commissioner and kind of his reasoning for that. He said, well, we want to give each rivalry their spotlight, their moment to shine throughout the season. So, for example, BYU and Utah, they had their game, in early November as opposed to the last week of the season, late November. But my thought was, imagine last night at Lavelle Edwards Stadium, it had been Utah playing BYU, and it was Utah with the chance to eliminate BYU from the Big 12 championship game.
Oof. So part of me loves it, but part of me is like those stakes are too high. Like it's
Fair,
almost too
fair. Yeah.
it's too insane. I'm thinking back to just the whole gamut of emotions that I was feeling during that BYU Utah game, and then adding like season bowl ramifications to that game. And it being at the very end of the season, I just, oh my gosh, I could feel it in my stomach just thinking about it. um, Kind of thinking about this idea of us calling BYU the losers of the week.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess that idea does make sense. This week they are the losers of the four teams that could have made bowl qualification, like could have qualified for that championship spot. They weren't one of the four teams, thus being losers. But what I do want to say is, as a BYU fan, as a BYU alum, someone who's been following this team for my whole life, I would consider the season an unequivocal success. If you and I hopped in a time machine right now and went and chatted with the July versions of ourselves. And I said to myself, will you accept that BYU is going to go 10-2 this season, their second season in the Big 12, and qualify for a bowl game? Is that a successful season to you? The July version of me would have cried, like, would have been
Yeah.
so happy with that idea, especially with that narrative in July. Oh, is BYU ready for this? BYU being projected to be one of the bottom teams in the Big 12. I definitely understand that as the season progressed and the story of BYU's season changed and they rose to being ranked, what, seventh in the nation, ending here at 17 and not qualifying for the playoff is a bummer. But I really I can't boohoo that much for my team and how they performed this year. I thought that they were fantastic. They were really fun to watch. And I can't wait to watch them even more because they're not done playing.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it. I mean, I think you definitely brought up really good points there. A lot of it has to do with timing. I think for me, like just how everything worked out with they had gotten to the point where they were 9-0 or whatever it was, right? I think we actually watched the Kansas game together where things really started to go downhill, and I think in some ways it was good that it happened then because I think that kind of tempered expectations for the last couple weeks of the season for BYU fans. Um, but at the same time, the reason that they're not in the Big 12 championship game and Arizona State and Kansas State are, I mean, over the last 2 weeks, the two losses that BYU got, one of them was to Arizona State just in the last couple weeks after that fantastic run that they had, right? And they beat Kansas State in Provo, right? Like by, 30 to whatever it was. And so I think that's just kind of a tough one to swallow with like the way you feel like you beat the teams you're supposed to beat, and then it comes down to just like these last couple weeks, and obviously, yeah, those two losses are going to hang pretty heavy. You shouldn't be losing at home to a Kansas team that was in the position that they were in, and you don't want to lose, to Arizona State at the time that they did to give, kind of give them the go ahead to get into that championship game. So I think a lot of it comes down to timing, how it all went down, which is why I kind of brought up like that the rivalry aspect of it. Maybe it is better that they had that Utah game earlier, because maybe if it had come later, it would have been one of their two losses. Who knows? It did seem like the team kind of started to lose steam, lose momentum as the season got went along. The wins got closer, the margins got thinner of those wins. As you mentioned, that Utah game was like insane, nail biter. Everyone was losing their minds. Their own athletic director, the Utah athletic director, lost his mind. So things were crazy, and I think yeah, at the end of the day, like it was a great college football season. It was successful, and it's also not over. They could have a really really fun bowl game, against one of the top, not only one of the most talented teams in the country, but like one of the most watched and most like paid attention to teams in the country with like two potential top three NFL draft picks. So the relevance and like spotlight of BYU has definitely jumped up a level this year. And I think that also comes at a price. There's been some rumors about their defensive coordinator, Jay Hill, potentially getting poached into a head coaching position as they open up, like I mentioned, like that UCF one. Utah State is also looking for a coach. They're not going to keep their interim head coach. So obviously vacancies all over the place. So with that kind of that heightened spotlight comes, all the fun things of college football, which let's be honest, college football is kind of a mess.
No, absolutely. I think that you laid that out perfectly. If anything, as I kind of pull out my crystal ball and project the future of BYU football in the Big 12, all I see are good things, and there
Yeah.
are going to be some growing pains, of course. Like you said, players come and go, coaches come and go. But if nothing else, this 2024 season has kind of established BYU's place in that conference. And I think a lot of those other programs have to take us seriously now, especially if we end up playing Colorado and beating Colorado.
Right.
See me saying we like I'm on the team, like. But anyway, you get what I'm saying.
There's two memes that I brought to mind. There's the picture of Drake in the Kentucky, like full Kentucky warm-ups sitting with the team, and then there's the one of like the kid in front of his TV and like full warm-ups just like for like standing for the anthem in front of his TV, which just fantastic images.
Both of those. I am both of those memes personified.
You're so for those who can't see right now, Nate is actually wearing like a full like Cosmo the Cougar. He's wearing like the Cougar ears right now, and he's just kind of he's all in. He considers himself, part of this team. So
Totally. Yeah, it's really hard for me to type on my computer with these paw mitts that I'm wearing that you guys can't see, but anyway, I'll figure it out.
yes, we'll figure it out. BYU will figure out where they're going to be going bowling. We will be off next week with water cooler talk. I'm traveling, heading back down to Texas. A little too early. I won't be able to catch this bowl game if it happens in Texas. Heading down for my brother's wedding down in Austin, Texas. So off next week and then back at you in 2 weeks. We will know by then where BYU is going. We'll know by then a lot more things about who these men's basketball teams are, BYU basketball, where the Jazz stand, where the Utah Hockey Club stands. They're kind of at a point where they kind of have to decide, go for the playoffs, go for the lottery, go for the draft, right? You don't want to be stuck in no man's land in the age of draft lottery. So a lot of exciting things coming up. And Nate, I appreciate you coming on and any thoughts on your first time on the pod?
Just that again, you can't see me because I'm wearing the Cosmo outfit, but I'm blushing. I'm so touched that you invited me to be on today. Thank you so much. It's been an honor. And hopefully I will talk to you again in this capacity sometime soon.
If you're down for it, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Sounds good, man. See you then.
I'll catch you guys later.